In 1959, Vince Lombardi walked into a Green Bay Packers locker room that had one game the entire previous season. One game. What was missing? Preparation, discipline, accountability? What was missing was a standard and someone willing to hold the line on it. So what did he do? He held up a football in front of the room full of professional football players and said, "Gentlemen, this is a football. That's it." And those players, many of them veterans, just stared at him. I'll tell you why he did that and why it matters for your construction company at the end of the episode. Stay with me. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Now, let's fast forward to 2024. Ben Johnson is the offensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions. That offense leads the entire NFL in scoring, 33 points a game. Every player knows their assignment before the snap. Every play has been worked through so many times that execution looks effortless. Johnson's preparation and accountability built something so dominant that the Chicago Bears hired him as their head coach in January of 2025. Because when you build a system that consistently produces results, the whole league takes notice. And in the very first season running his own team, Ben Johnson's Chicago Bears won the NFC North, beat the Packers in the playoffs for the first time since 1941, and came within inches of beating the Rams and getting to the NFC Championship game. That doesn't happen without a system, a standard, and a leader who holds the line on both. Old school is the new school. Lombardi said these things in 1959. Ben Johnson proved them again in 2025 and 2026. These truths don't expire. And here's why I'm bringing this up on today's podcast. Late in 2025, MI, one of the most respected advisory firms in the construction industry, published part 1 of their 2025 project management study. They surveyed 243 executives and 84 project managers across the country. Real contractors, real numbers, real problems. I'll link to the full report in the show notes. You got to check it out. What they found is that the same principles Lombardi was teaching in a Green Bay locker room 65 years ago are exactly what separates high-performing construction companies from everyone else today. Preparation before the work starts. Accountability to a consistent standard. Everyone owning their role before the first crew hits the job site. The research is new, but the truth is timeless. I've been thinking about this study, and today I want to break down the most important findings for you in plain language with a clear lens on what it means for your business. Because what it comes down to is 3 specific things that are happening or not happening in your company right now. And if they're not happening, it's costing you. Here's the big headline from the study. Only 2.5% of firms report that projects consistently finish on time and on budget. 2.5%. If you're in that 2.5%, I'd like to congratulate you and ask you to please contact me because I'd love to have you on the podcast to discuss your insights into running effective projects. But if you're like most owners I work with, your honest answer to the question, do our projects consistently hit their margins and schedules? Well, that answer is not really. The question isn't whether your projects are underperforming. For most companies, they are. The question you've got to think about is, where does this underperformance start? And the answer is going to challenge you because it starts before the first crew ever gets to the job site. And it runs directly through a role that most owners don't invest nearly enough time in developing. I'm talking about your project executive, your PX. Here's what I see in company after company, and you may recognize this in your own organization. You've got a great PM, a guy or a gal who knows how to run a job, sharp, experienced, earns the trust of the field and the client, so you promote them. You make them a PX, responsible for a team of PMs and a portfolio of projects. And then one of 2 things happen. Either they thrive and genuinely make the shift from running projects to running people who run projects, or, and this is far more common, they default right back to being a super PM. They're in the weeds on every job. Their PMs aren't growing because every hard problem ends up on the PX's desk. And you, as the owner, are wondering why you're not getting the leverage you expected when you made that hire or that promotion. I call this promote and hope. And it's one of the most expensive mistakes in construction. The shift from PM to PX is one of the hardest transitions in this industry. Because being a great PM is about doing. Being a great PX is about building the people and the systems that do. And nobody teaches that. You get a new title, maybe a raise, and you're expected just to figure it out. What this research does is give your PXs a clear picture of exactly what their PMs need to be doing and exactly where the gaps are. 3 specific areas. And the PX's job is to build the process, set the standard, and hold the line on each one. Let's walk through them. The first one is the estimating disconnect. And here's the simplest way I can put it. When your PM has no voice in the estimate, they inherit a plan they don't own. And a plan nobody owns is a plan nobody protects. Think about what that looks like in practice. Your estimators build a number. They make assumptions about productivity. They make calls on long lead items, on contingency, on schedule, and then the project gets handed off to a PM who wasn't in the room. He opens that estimate, and half of what he sees doesn't match how he knows the work actually gets done. So what does he do? He makes it work as best as he can. And as best as he can means margin erosion. It means schedule risk. It means starting a job already behind. Here's what the data shows. When project managers are at least moderately involved in estimating, the likelihood of hitting profit margins jumps from 55% to 78%. 23 percentage points just from getting your PM in the room during the estimating process. But 65% of executives surveyed report that PM involvement in estimating is below 25%, and their own PMs confirm it. Now, before you say we can't have our PMs doing estimating, that's not what I'm talking about. Your PM shouldn't become an estimator. What needs to happen is earlier, more deliberate involvement in the bid, so by the time a project is won, the PM has some skin in the game. They've challenged the productivity assumptions, they've flagged the long lead items, they've weighed in on the schedule, they feel ownership of the plan and the number and everything involved with the project. And here's the business reason that matters. When a PM owns the number, they fight to protect it. When they've inherited it, then they don't. So what does your PX have to do with this? The PX owns this process. It's the project executive's job to make the PM involvement in bid reviews non-negotiable. Not we invite them to it when it's convenient. It's required. The PX builds the structure, gets the PM in the room at the right stage of the pursuit, makes sure the handoff from estimating to project management is a real transfer of knowledge and accountability, not just a handoff of a spreadsheet. If your PX isn't enforcing this, it's not going to happen because everyone is busy. Busy people default to the old way. The PX is the one who changes the default. The second area is the planning illusion. And this one might sting just a little bit. Here's a number that should give every owner pause. Nearly 90% of contractors say they have a defined project management playbook, but only 24% apply it highly consistently across projects. 9 in 10 companies have the binder. 1 in 4 actually use it. That's a lot of dusty binders. That gap between having a process and living a process is where your margins are leaking. Because when each of your PMs does pre-execution planning their own way, you're not getting consistent results across your portfolio. You're getting the results of whatever your least disciplined PM did on that particular job when he was trying to close out 3 other projects at the same time. The study asked executives whether their PMs do a thorough job of pre-execution planning. Here's what's interesting. 35% of project managers said yes, planning is thorough and proactive. Only 20% of executives agreed. Your PMs think they're doing a better job than you think they are. That gap in perception is itself a problem, because it means nobody's having the honest conversation about what thorough actually looks like. And let's see what's at stake. Companies where executives strongly agree that PMs conduct thorough pre-execution planning hit profit margins 81% of the time. Where executives somewhat disagree, 50%. 81 versus 50. That's the difference between a great year and a painful one. Remember what I said at the top about Lombardi and Ben Johnson? The teams that win aren't always the most talented. They're the most prepared. This is where that shows up in the numbers. And this is exactly where most construction companies are leaving money on the table. There are 3 reasons real planning rarely happens. First, there's no defined standard. There are 3 reasons real planning rarely happens. First, there's no defined standard. Every PM interprets thorough planning differently. Second, there's no accountability. Nobody checks whether good planning actually happened. And third, there's no capacity. Your PM is trying to close out his last job while spinning up this job, and something always gets sacrificed. And it's always the planning on the new one that seems to drift and be neglected. Most pre-execution planning is one person going through the motions, alone, under time pressure, checking boxes so they can say it got done. What it should be is a working session where the PM, the superintendent, even the foreman, the estimator, and whoever else needs to be in the room actually sits down together and work through every known risk on that job. Not a presentation, not a briefing, a working session with an agenda and a commitment that nobody leaves until the hard questions are answered. Your PX's job is to define what that looks like at your company, not leave it to each PM's gut. Run structured planning sessions, set the standard, then inspect what you expect. Everything I just described, getting PMs into the estimate, running structured pre-execution planning, setting a consistent standard, that's not hard to understand. You probably already knew that. The reason it doesn't happen consistently in most companies isn't a knowledge problem, it's a leadership problem. And specifically, it's a problem with the PX role. Your PX is the person who should be making sure your PMs own the estimate before mobilization. Your PX is the person who should be defining what thorough planning looks like and holding PMs accountable to it. Your PX is the bridge between your strategy as an owner and the execution happening all across the jobs your company is working on. But here's what usually happens. You promote your best PM to PX, and they're great at running projects, so they keep running projects, just more of them. And your team of PMs doesn't get stronger, they get covered for. The shift from PM to PX is one of the hardest things I see construction leaders navigate. And I work specifically with PXs to help them make that shift. Not to help them manage more projects, but to help them become the kind of leader who builds PMs who manage projects well. There's a world of difference between those two things. If you've got a PX right now, someone you've promoted from PM, someone who's great at the technical work, but struggling to lead a team, struggling to delegate, still getting pulled into the weeds on every problem, that's exactly the work I do in my executive coaching program. We work on how to lead a team instead of being the team, how to build accountability structures that are real, not just aspirational, how to have the direct conversation with a PM who isn't planning thoroughly, who isn't getting field buy-in, who's running on instinct rather than process, and how to think about the portfolio of work they're responsible for instead of constantly reacting to the biggest fire on the job site today. That transition is learnable, and when your PX makes it, the impact runs throughout every project in your company. If you want to talk to me about what that could look like for your PX, go over to constructiongenius.com and book a call with me. I'm happy to chat with you about what the executive coaching looks like. And I've also got a link in the show notes to my calendar. Now, let's move on to the third area. This might be the most important one, field alignment. And the way I describe it is this. The field has to own the plan before they ever show up to the job site. Not have heard about the plan, not have been briefed on the plan, but own it. The research found that only 1 in 4 executives strongly agree that their project managers are securing field leader buy-in before mobilization, which means 75% of you are regularly sending superintendents, foremen, and crews to a job site where they haven't truly co-owned the plan, where the logistics, the sequence, the labor plan, the schedule, none of that has been locked down together before work starts. And so you're burning the first week figuring things out that should have been resolved weeks before mobilization. Here's the schedule data. Companies with strong field alignment finish on time or early 76% of the time. With weak alignment, that number drops to 58%. 18 percentage points of schedule reliability just from getting the superintendent and the foreman truly locked in before the work begins. One executive contractor quoted in the FMI study said something that really stuck with me. He put it this way: "We are in the labor management business. Materials can be returned. Labor dollars cannot." Think about that. Once your crew is on site, the clock is running. Every day of misalignment is money you will never get back. The best contractors treat field buy-in as a formal checkpoint with teeth. No mobilization without superintendent sign-off. Not an email summary, not a meeting where the PM talked and the super listened, a working session where the field leader helped build a plan, and a written commitment before anyone drives to the site. Here's the thing about planning meetings that most people get wrong. A briefing is not a buy-in. Standing in front of a whiteboard and walking your superintendent through the plan someone else built is not the same thing as that superintendent owning the plan. It's presenting, it's informing, but it's not collaborating, and it won't produce the same result. Your PX needs to make sure their PMs understand that distinction and then enforce it. Pre-mobilization field sign-off is either a hard stop at your company or it's optional. And optional means it gets skipped whenever someone's under time pressure, and you know that there is always time pressure. So let's wrap this up. What the research shows, and what I see confirmed in my experience in 2 decades plus of working with construction companies, is not revolutionary. It's not a new technology or a hot management theory. It's 3 things that have always mattered, that most companies know they should be doing, and that most companies are not doing consistently. Get your PMs involved in the estimate so they own the number before the job is run. Run active, structured, pre-execution planning so your whole team knows how to win before the first crew arrives. Get your superintendent to co-own the plan and sign off on it before mobilization. That's it. 3 things. And the contractor who does all 3 consistently, not occasionally, not on some jobs, across the portfolio, is the contractor who is building a business instead of just building one project at a time, hoping for the best. Your PX is the lever that makes all 3 happen. Not by doing it themselves, by building the system, setting the standard, and holding their PMs accountable to it. And if your PX is struggling with that, if they're still operating like a super PM, if they can't quite make the shift from doing to leading, that gap is costing you more than you know. It's showing up in your margins. It's showing up in your schedule performance. It's showing up in the inconsistency you feel across your entire business. This is part 1 of a 3-part research series. Part 2 digs into what high performers do differently once work is actually underway. Part 3 will look at where the PM role is headed and what it takes to build the next generation of project leadership. We'll be covering both of those in upcoming episodes, so keep your eyes peeled. For now, take one thing from today and do something with it. Go have a real conversation with your PX, not about a specific project, but about how they're leading their team. Ask them, do your PMs own their estimates or inherit them? Do your pre-execution planning sessions have a defining standard, or does each PM wing it? Is field sign-off a hard stop before mobilization, or does it sometimes get skipped? The answer to those 3 questions will tell you a lot about where your next 10 points of margin are hiding. Now, I promised you at the top that I'd tell you why Vince Lombardi held up a football in front of a room full of professional players and said, "Gentlemen, this is a football." Here's why. It wasn't an insult. It was a message. He was telling them, we're going back to the beginning. We're going to master the fundamentals, not occasionally, not when it's convenient, but every single time on every single play. No shortcuts, no assumptions, no, we already know this. We are going to do the basics right all the time until doing them right becomes who we are. 7 years later, they had 5 championships. That is exactly what this research is telling you to do in your construction company in 2026. Get your PM into the estimate, plan the job thoroughly before mobilization, get your superintendent to own the plan before the first crew arrives. These aren't new ideas. They're not complicated. They are the football. And your PX is the one who has to hold it up every project, every time, and hold the line on the standard. That's the job. That's always been the job. Lombardi knew it in 1959. Ben Johnson proved it again in 2025 and 2026. And the research is confirming it right now across hundreds of construction companies nationwide. Old school is the new school. The fundamentals never stop being true. I'll link to the full report from FMI in the show notes. Go check it out. It's worth your time. And we'll catch you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity. And to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.